So here's the situation. Iran strikes a deal with Brazil and Turkey to send away some of its uranium. This is what the U.S. and several other countries want because they're afraid Iran could do some really, really bad things with that uranium. But those other countries, the U.S., Russia, France, etc., decide to slap Iran with sanctions the very next day anyway. Now Brazil and Turkey are mad at those countries called the P5+1 because the deal can now be in jeopardy. And another note, Russia has usually been against these sanctions against Iran, but suddenly it's cool with them. So what gives? To explain, defense analyst Ivan Eland here to join us. This year, Eland, hello to you from New York. Well, you're in New York, I'm in Washington anyway. Not to confuse things a little bit more. So tell us about if there's an update with these sanctions, how things are progressing. I know that there was a lot of questions in terms of what these sanctions would mean, how they would seriously materialize, and also questions about the details of this deal between Iran, Brazil, and Turkey. Can you kind of explain this all to us right now?
Well, they reached a deal that was offered to Iran a long time ago, and Iran initially said yes and then backed off from it. And what the Iranians apparently wanted to do was generate more uranium. So they have agreed to ship the same amount of uranium as when the deal was originally concocted. But the problem is they have more uranium now. So I think the countries, Russia, the U.S., the people in the Security Council, and those countries, they're feeling that now Iran may have enough, even if it ships the uranium to Turkey under the deal. They might have enough uranium still there to make a warhead. Now, the original deal was supposed to be they ship the uranium off and they get fuel rods from a medical reactor in return. So that was fine back when it was most of your uranium in Iran, but they've since generated more. So they're worried that they could send the uranium off and still have enough left over to make a bomb. So I think what's happened here is that the U.S. and Russia have cut a deal for Russian support of the sanctions. The U.S. will remove sanctions on Russian companies that are accused of helping Iran to create weapons of mass destruction. The U.S. is pulling those sanctions off Russian companies. I think the U.S. will also allow the Russians to help the Iranian reactor at Bushehr, which is a light water reactor, which has nothing to do with weapons or is harder to be weapons and proliferation friendly. And in exchange for these items, the Russians will support the sanctions on Iran.
What does this, in your opinion, do, especially when it comes to the Bushehr and also the deal when it comes with, I believe what you're referring to are the S-300 missiles? What does this do to the relationship between the United States and Israel, if there is any sort of effect that is played out on the relationship between the two countries?
Well, it's unclear what's going to happen with these S-300 air defense missiles because the treaty, or the resolution at the UN explicitly leaves those out. But the Russians have also been fairly good at this vigilance that they're supposed to keep, in that they have delayed the sale. So technically they're not barred from selling these missiles, the defense missiles, to Iran, but they may do so anyway. That's unclear as to what's going to happen with those at the present time. Mm-hmm. But of course, the fear among Israel and the United States is that if Iran gets these air defense missiles, they'll put them around nuclear sites, and then if Israel would try to bomb the reactor in Iran, or the nuclear facilities, that of course they would shoot down Israeli aircraft. So that's why the U.S. and the Israelis are very opposed to Russia selling these missiles.
Now, we don't have too much time. I'm going to ask you to take on a huge subject matter here, but let's change gears and go over to North Korea, South Korea, and sanctions possibly being slapped on North Korea. Can you tell us about just a little bit about that, what the update is on that story that broke out?
Well, South Korea is putting sanctions on the North over this torpedoing of their ship, and the United States will back that effort to pressure North Korea. The problem with sanctions is sanctions don't usually work, but they're always put on because they're an intermediate step when diplomacy, that is a slap on the wrist, is perceived as too weak. and going to war or covert military operations are regarded as too strenuous a response. And so they have to find a middle ground, because North Korea is very unstable and its leaders are very unpredictable, and they're afraid that if the South Koreans retaliate too much for the sinking of the South Korean ship by the North Koreans, that they'll have a war. And so there's a lot of artillery, North Korean artillery, right on the border, and Seoul is right next to the border. So they don't want to provoke a war, so they're trying to go with the middle option, and that's what sanctions do. And I think we go back to Iran a second, the same thing is true. They're trying to go the middle road, and it's a political statement, but it's unlikely to make either country behave better.
Okay. Ivan Eland, defense analyst, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry I'm going to have to cut you off here, but thank you for joining us again.